Merry Christmas. Yeah, no, I think it's very doable, Neil. There's some work that's still ahead of us, but the discussions have been very fruitful. We continue to close in, and it's really just a matter, I think, at this point of getting agreement between the House and Senate conferees on those final items. But I feel good about where we're at. I think the timeline is something that's very meetable, and I think it's important that we meet that timeline. We need to get this done before the end of the year and get a bill on the President's desk that he can sign into law.
Would he sign a bill that might have a higher corporate rate than the 20% that he's envisioning?
I think the President is letting Congress do its work. I think he's anxious to get a result. Obviously he weighs in from time to time with his views on these individual issues, but I think right now he wants Congress to finish the work, and I think he's expressed at least a good deal of flexibility in terms of some of the issues that we're dealing with and what he ultimately would be willing to sign. But in the end, we're going to have a good bill that doubles the standard deduction, that doubles the child tax credit, lowers rates, and is going to get this economy cranking along even faster and creating those better paying jobs and higher wages that everybody wants to see in this country.
You hope, but tucked in there in order to get it through the Senate, I understand the limitations you had. There's a higher, the AMT remains, the alternative minimum tax, and to get rid of that, that's been the source of this gossip that the corporate rate will go up or be delayed. Where do you stand on that?
Well, look, I'm trying to keep an open mind. I'd like to keep the corporate rate at 20. That's what the House had. That's what the Senate had. That's what the framework called for. That's what the President's been. Of course, as you get into these discussions and people, trying to work out these differences between the House and the Senate, some of these things score,
right,
and that takes additional revenue. So you have to find the offsets. And I would say probably the more challenging part that we're dealing with right now is just figuring out what offsets can we bring to the table that will enable us to finish the job and to do the things that we want to do. But in the end, this is going to be a good product that is consistent with the objectives and the goals that we laid out at the very beginning of the process. And frankly, right now, it's just really closing out those final details on policy, and then of course, it's just as importantly figuring out how we're going to pay for them.
The deduction for state and local taxes, the so-called SALT thing that you and the House have agreed to remove, albeit with $10,000 caps, that's been revisited, we're told, by maybe looking at the people most directly affected, the upper income, reducing their rate beyond even the 38.5% that you in the Senate have proposed. I think it still is at 39.6 in the House. Where's the wiggle room there? Is there? What do you think?
Well, there is. That's an important part of the conversation because the SALT deduction is so important, particularly in the House. In the Senate, we had initially in the Finance Committee wiped it out. When we moved it to the floor, we moved to the House position, which was to allow up to a $10,000 deduction for property taxes. There are members in the House, of course, who would like to see some optionality between property and income taxes, and so we're looking at ways to solve that. One of the suggestions has been to lower the top rate, and that obviously brings some relief, particularly in those high-tax states. So,
do you like that personally, Senator, or no?
Well, those are all levers that we're working with. I think that, obviously I'm for getting the rates down for everybody, and if we're able to lower that rate, that'd be a good outcome. But obviously it's a matter of give and take, and right now that's the process that we're in, and none of these decisions are final. But we know we're going to have to solve a SALT problem and a few other issues that have cropped up along the way.
You might have heard there's apparently some election in Alabama tonight, and if Roy Moore were to win that, do you think he should be seated as a United States Senator?
Well, I don't think there's any question that he would have to be seated. I think the Constitution and subsequent court cases have made that very clear. So I think he will eventually be seated. And of course, we'll cross the bridge of what happens after that if and when he wins and he gets here. But we'll know more about that obviously tonight and tomorrow.
Others have talked about an ethics investigation if he won, even though it would be decades-old charges. But one way or the other, some of you and your colleagues are anxious about it. What do you think?
There are obviously members who are anxious about this. These are serious allegations. They did happen a long time ago. And the question, of course, is if he comes in here, would there be an investigation? I think it's inevitable that would be, somebody's going to call for that. I think somebody's going to file a complaint, and so these issues are going to be more fully vetted and looked at and investigated, I suspect, at some time if and when he arrives here. So I think that's an inevitability. I've said all along I would have preferred if he had stepped aside and not put us in this situation, but the people of Alabama are going to decide that tonight, and then we'll deal with the consequences of that tomorrow.
Senator Thune, thank you.
Thanks, Neil.